This is Hope Incorporated Australia. We engage with citizens and communities to help achieve better, responsible environmental protection and stewardship, locally, nationally and globally. We work from and adjacent to the traditional lands of the Gayabal, Jadawa and Yugara peoples of southeast Queensland, and we acknowledge our deep respect for the inspiring, protective nature stewardship carried out by First Nations communities around the world for thousands of years. A warm welcome to Imagining 2040 Pathways to Flourishing Futures, a podcast from Hope Incorporated Australia. I'm your host, Andrew Nicholson. In this digital space, we want to reinvigorate the often overlooked power of public imagination and future visioning. Our own vision for this podcast project is to help grow a creative, values-driven community of imaginative, bigger picture thinkers, people who collaborate, share ideas, and help map plausible, credible pathways towards futures that will be climate safer, properly nature protected, socially more supportive, and economically fairer in the share out of resources, futures which will leave no one behind. Each episode will offer simple but energising future visioning exercises designed to spark your imagination and help you picture what a thriving, more inclusive and sustainable future could look like for you and your community. Because the future is not a fixed destination. It is being shaped every day by the decisions we make individually and collectively. Together we can choose to make different future development decisions that serve the many, not the few, and we can push harder for the major system-level changes needed to make those better futures real. Over time, we hope imaginative, citizen-generated, visionary thinking can help amplify public calls for a just transition toward flourishing future development and fuel the push for the major progressive reforms needed to get there. Our pilot episodes explore some of those future reform possibilities in education, in citizen involvement in development planning, and in environmental protection advocacy. If you like what you hear, we'll expand the series with more visionary topics and voices, and we'll keep inviting your ideas, your input, and your imagination to help shape our future direction. So, put on your imaginative future vision thinking caps and join me and my guests as we chart positive, credible pathways toward a flourishing 2040 and beyond. I look forward to your company.
That citizen science, that ability to value the people's voice in designing these neighbourhoods and making what they see and what we feel in the neighbourhood match what they value in their daily life and what they need for their families or their home situation, and that contributes holistically to well-being of the whole society.
This is, I guess, what really gets me excited about planning and what we're seeing sort of unfold in front of us. We're paying less attention to, all the car advertisements, going our own way, getting out of all congestion while we're sitting there on public transport and thinking more about how things could be better.
In today's episode, we're turning our attention and imaginations to the built environment, infrastructure, construction, and urban and regional planning, one of the most powerful tools and forces for transformation we have to shape how we live, connect, and care for our environments. We'll be seeking some answers to the question, what contribution might planning be able to make toward creating a flourishing future for all in this and the following decades ahead? As cities and regions continue to grow rapidly and evolve, planners face immense challenges. These include rising housing pressure, climate risks, infrastructure demands, and growing inequality. The decisions made today about transport systems, green space, housing, and energy will define the quality of life for generations to come. But all too often, in the past at least, these decisions have been made without meaningful community input, risking outcomes that leave people behind or reduce their well-being. So how could we plan differently? How could we ensure that urban and regional development truly serves people and the planet? One major shift could lie in how we involve citizens, not just in consultations, but in shaping decisions from the ground up. Can we, for instance, imagine future planning processes in which communities co-design solutions using the same tools as experts, like real-time data visualization, interactive spatial models and scenarios, and digital platforms that make complex information easier to understand? And how might inclusive engagement methods such as citizen juries, participatory mapping, and creative storytelling help people shape the places they live in ways that reflect their needs, hopes, and diverse perspectives? Could such innovations be used to shape a future in the next decade and beyond, in which urban planning and citizen participatory decision-making becomes faster, smarter, and more collaborative? Helping answer some of these questions and perhaps posing a few others are my two great guests today. Dr. Lara Motti is a research fellow at the John Grill Institute for Project Leadership in the School of Project Management at the University of Sydney, Australia. Dr. Anthony Kimpton is a lecturer in urban and regional planning in the School of Surveying and Built Environment at the University of Southern Queensland. So, a warm welcome to you both, Lara and Anthony, and let's get straight into the conversation today by inviting you both to give us a short introduction to you and your work. Let's start on that with Lara.
Thanks, Andy. So wonderful to be here speaking with you and Anthony today. I'm an academic researcher in the project management space with an industry background really in urban planning and environmental management, environmental science. Projects have been a big focus of my career, particularly major, mega projects. They've always been about infrastructure. It's been a part of my work. And my research right now is exploring how these big projects have an impact on the social environment, on the physical environment, and the outcomes we want to see for the future. You know, what do we want as a society and as individuals to see from these projects? And I think this is really relevant to what we're going to be talking about today.
Thank you very much, Lara. And Anthony, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I'm looking forward to this, chatting to you and Lara about topics very near and dear to my heart. So, my name is Dr. Anthony Kimpton. I'm a lecturer of urban and regional planning at the University of Southern Queensland. So, our university's got 3 campuses at Toowoomba, Ipswich and Springfield, and I'm based at the School of Surveying and Built Environment. So, specifically at Springfield. So broadly, our university focuses on regional Australia and the challenges, particularly for development of, towns and our regions. But our strengths really as a university are agriculture and the environment, space defence, health, and regional development. I tend to focus on the latter two, so health and regional development. And I typically focus on public space. So we're talking about public parks, transport networks, parking space, and public transit. So I look at this as a way to make, our cities and our towns much more sustainable. So prior to my time at the University of Southern Queensland, I was also a senior data specialist with the Australian Bureau of Statistics Big Data Pathways Division. And I'm very excited to be here.
That's great. And thank you both for that pithy introduction. And just as with every episode, listeners can follow up on your background, research work and interest via the show note links, which we're going to put in there. Once again, thank you both for the opportunity to interview for the Imagining 2040 Pathways to Flourishing Futures podcast series. And let's just keep the momentum rolling, folks. You've started to give us an outline of your background there. Let's now dig into that in a bit more detail. First of all, how you developed your interests and energy for the work you're doing today in 2025. Can you give us a bit of a summary of that? And we'll start just keeping, alternating here. We'll start with Anthony on that one.
Thanks, Andy. So, like a lot of urban and regional planners, I started quite indirectly in this space. So, I wasn't even aware of the profession really because I grew up in a regional area. But it was actually during my time when I was working at bookshops. So, I started university quite late in my 20s. And I was a bit obsessive with particularly like Charles Dickens, that sort of industrialization era, looking at, the impacts of industrialization and how it transforms society. And our lifestyles, our livelihoods and aspirations. And it was also during this time there was a bit of a rise in this non-fiction like Jared Diamond's Collapse, How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed. So I was becoming aware that there was essentially a scientific approach to really understanding these big societal processes such as industrialisation and urbanisation. But it was actually, we had a book launch with Dr. Carl, and it was actually Dr. Carl that tipped me into this space. So I had a good chat with him, a lot of career advice, because I was kind of sitting on the fence with a lot of fields. And he wrote in a book that he signed for me during the event that time is nature's way of keeping everything from happening at once. So that was pretty good advice at the time, just picking a path and seeing where it takes me. But I still at this point hadn't heard of urban and regional planning, so I enrolled in archaeology and sociology because I thought, whoa, industrial archaeology and urban sociology will get me where I wanted to be. I did this for time. It provided a good foundations in urban theory and history and a lot of analytical skills, but didn't really provide me with a career pathway. So it was really while I was at university that I discovered land use, transport and regional planning and policy and got me into this space. So this is a pretty common experience for a lot of planners, to the point that the Planning Institute of Australia conducts these regular surveys and they write their State of the Profession report, and it reveals that most planners actually find out about the profession through family or friends. And in some ways, the decline of social sciences in high schools, and particularly geography, is kind of the reason we tend to think that planning is kind of in decline in terms of enrolments, really, because students aren't really aware of how this can turn, articulate into a career in time. But in lots of ways, planning is really applied social sciences. I guess, it's a big challenge for us, but it has been around for quite a while, but the profession is still relatively young when we compare it to lots of other fields. So, we've got these other professions that work in a very similar way or a similar space, so like law, civil engineering, architecture, but it's not as well known. But if we think back, Romans, for instance, they were in some ways a lot of our earliest urban planners. So they had all these large infrastructure developments. We had to essentially rebuild London in the West following the Great Fire of London, where we introduced, building codes, essentially, setbacks and yards to try and space buildings so we couldn't have fires sweeping through again. And we also started to have these people such as John Snow that were... we tend to regard him as an epidemiologist today, but he was really overlaying a lot of maps, so water and sewage, and looking at cholera cases to determine the source of cholera. So it's a lot of this thinking early on. And then more recently, we had a lot of what we tend to more frame as urban reformers. So if we think of Ebenezer Howard and the Garden City movement, it was really about providing a lot of urban amenities while still having these sort of benefits from living in rural environments and lifestyle qualities. And really prior to his time, parks were typically private spaces that you had to pay to enter, but it started being seen as a public good really through movements similar to his Garden City movement. So I take a lot of inspiration from people like him, Lee Corsair's Radiant City. So we see these sorts of ideas of building these high residential tower blocks and trying to free a bit more space for pedestrians and green space. And I guess one of the cities that really captures this today is Vancouver, where we're looking towards building, very high and vertical, and developers are generally required to actually provide green space, public green space around the base of the buildings. So it keeps these gaps between buildings and people get to retain that visual amenity, and it's a relatively green city. So, these people have had a huge influence. Likewise, Jane Jacobs. So if we think of her contributions, really emphasise the importance of mixed-use development, because over time, planning has become much more zoning focused and separating different land use types. But yeah, we can really attribute a lot of this in the public consultation to Jane Jacobs. So that's broadly what got me into it. Was a lot of inspiration from these figures. And in terms of my space, because I do have that data science background, I tend to work in what we call plan tech. So it's really about developing technologies to support planners and really making strategic planning more efficient and evidence-based. So I'll talk a little bit more in detail about these in just a moment, once Lara's had a chance to introduce herself.
Well, Anthony, I tell you what, that was a fantastic smorgasbord of stuff. I mean, your eclectic, interconnected, holistic background, a mini history of planning thought in about 2 minutes, plus the reference to Dickens. We'll have to riff off on that on another podcast episode. I was thinking of Hard Times Victorian London and hard times, and you could say hard times as a metaphor perhaps for what we're dealing with, some of the challenges we're dealing with now. But listen, over to Lara now. The same thing, Lara, your work and career interests, the energy and interest and passion that has led up to what you're doing now in 2025. Give us an overview.
My professional kind of background was much more inspired by my childhood and the things that surrounded me and the great examples I had in my life around that time. So I would say probably from an early age, I was always really interested in transport and the environment. Watching the V8s with Dad, on the car, on the TV, riding my bike at Centennial Park, which is in Sydney, where I grew up, with my brother and my mum. They're kind of activities that made me think about my place in the environment and how I related to it. But I guess I never really thought about this in a kind of academic way until I started school and I picked the subject geography. So it was really, interesting that Anthony mentioned that in his introduction about the decline in numbers. I think I should do some more talks at schools, but geography was really what ignited my passion in this space. It was really that light bulb moment where I went, hey, I'm really interested in this. I'm quite good at this. And I'm really, really keen to explore more about the things that I do in my world in a little way in this kind of global scale. And I became interested, I suppose, in the bigger impact and the context. And my final assignment in high school was actually looking at the environmental impact statement and the impacts of the third runway in Sydney on my neighbourhood. And, when I went with my mum and went up the street and interviewed all the neighbours, knocked on their door and asked them what they thought about this and were they concerned about the noise or, what impact they thought it might have on their lives. And little did I know that this is what I would be doing for a career. That's what geographers do. That's what impact assessment consultants do. And, as I've moved through my career, I've started to write these reports as an environmental consultant, and I did that for about 13 years. And then I started to get to know the planning processes behind that as I worked on the job through that, and I did do other qualifications as well. But I really started to become curious about the processes behind the impact assessments themselves that I was writing, and I guess the impact of the impact assessments. Why did I feel like often I would put the best science in these reports and it didn't seem to translate into outcomes for people on the ground. And that kind of got me into doing my PhD, which was looking at this space. So I guess I did my PhD a bit later in life as well. And it kind of helped me bring that knowledge together in my mind and solidify what I wanted to look at in a big piece of research study that is a PhD. And I had also a fantastic opportunity after I finished my PhD to work in government and then get that hands-on experience again behind the scenes to see what happens once a report is submitted, how it's regulated, and how the planners work tirelessly to kind of be that interface between community and industry or government if it's a public infrastructure project, and mediate and make sure that, on balance, we're getting the best outcome for both communities and governments and wider society or industry or whoever might be putting forward a project. And I guess on the other side of that now, I sit in a research role purely in academia, but it is a little bit different in that I do have quite an interface with policymakers and industry through the different working groups that we have. But right now I try and unpack what support I feel like that practitioners or governments need to get those next steps through planning, through projects to see that kind of future that we want to see, both in matching the needs and values of society as well as understanding that there are budgets and safety issues and limits of environment and all those sorts of things that kind of go behind infrastructure planning. But yeah, so that's how I kind of got into my space, and I was one of those geographers, that went, oh, Urban planning. That sounds like a great idea. I'm really interested in that without realizing that, I was an urban planner all along. I was already observing. So yeah, thanks, Eddie.
Oh, thank you, Laura. Again, such a diverse range of work interests, the focus that you've had there. As with Anthony as well. Look, and just you folks have been across so many different areas of career interest and focus. I think it's worth just keeping up with this past, present, future orientation a little bit longer, because I know that your work also projects very much maps into the future, and that's what we want to talk about now. So, looking ahead, can you give us some early thoughts? You've already started to point to this, but some early thoughts on how your work going forward may be able to contribute to getting us onto different, more flourishing future development paths by 2040. And just to be specific about that, what we mean by that in this series is pathways which could take us toward better futures that would be climate safer, properly nature protected, more socially inclusive, and fairer economically in their share out of resources. That is, flourishing futures which would leave no one behind, futures we would be proud to leave to the generations to follow. So, folks, on that basis, tell us about your work going forward, and we'll start with Anthony again on this particular segment.
Thanks, Andy. Well, like I described, I tend to work in plan tech because I do have a bit of a software development background, and so an area that I'm currently focusing on is what we call participatory geographic information systems. So it's really about involving the community more directly in planning decisions, particularly at the local government level. And currently we have these planning systems in place that are designed to really engage the public and get their feedback, but it's only a small minority that tend to get involved. So broadly, when we're thinking of a participatory geographic information system, it might be a physical map or it might be a digital map, but I tend to work more in that digital space, and it's really enabling people to identify the barriers and facilitators in their neighbourhood towards some planning outcomes. So it could be, for instance, shifting more people into, say, walking, cycling, or using public transport. So we want to know what discourages them. So they might identify dangerous road crossings or note that there's not enough shade along their routes, and this discourages them from using more sustainable forms of transport. I really see my role because I'm based in an academic setting, but I work very closely with industry looking at how we prepare planners to really making these platforms much more dynamic and really reducing that expertise barrier between professional planners, a lot of our allied professions, so like I said, civil engineers, lawyers, architects, and our community stakeholders, and also making these a bit more sophisticated. So there are similar sorts of platforms out there, but they tend to oversimplify a lot of the spatial associations and represent different relationships. By having really digital maps, it means that we can make it a bit more dynamic. So historically, we've tend to look at spatial problems really as static maps. We've had to print them out, but with digital maps, we can actually show change, really. That's the big distinction. So we can look at, for instance, commuter flows, which are a bit hard to describe when you think of a static map. But we can also look at other things such as local housing trends. So it's capturing this information, and it's also, you'll find a lot of these platforms tend to have, for instance, heat maps that show where people have a lot of negativity towards a particular area, but we should know a little bit better in our planning profession because we're the people that zone different areas. If you think of how we might, say, concentrate a lot of residential density around a particular, say, train station, naturally we'd expect to see more people complaining because there's more people there. So quite often we tend to oversimplify these things and rely on human biases to interpret. So we have more sophisticated statistical ways to look at these sorts of effects. So spatial autocorrelation was the term I was trying to think of. So it's essentially baking these ideas into the analyses so that we can actually get a truer representation and kind of reduce the human biases when we're looking at these problems, because we might find very similar environmental characteristics in other areas, but there's fewer people living there. So we want to actually understand how infrastructure influences people. In terms of more specifically where I tend to focus, my current passion really is chrono-urbanism. So that's where you hear these terms about 30-minute cities and 15-minute neighbourhoods. And so they're kind of distinct concepts. So when we're talking about a 30-minute city, it's really about making sure that most of our needs are accessible within 30 minutes by various transport modes, whereas a 15-minute neighbourhood is more focusing on those daily necessities that we don't want to trek across town for. So getting groceries, for instance, or a GP visit. And it's really making sure that we can access these potentially by active or public transport. So this is particularly important when we think of, we're in an ageing society in the West, in Australia, and so making sure that people can still get around and they're not burdened by car ownership in the same way. So these are important considerations. So I tend to work in this space and really, interrogating this a bit more and working out, if we look at Australians, we have, I think from memory, it was around about 20% of Australians are within a 30-minute cycle from work, but within this range, we've got about 89% that are actually driving. So what is it about the built environment that doesn't make this appealing? And I picked this 30-minute distance really to illustrate a point because this is the recommended daily physical activity which is in decline in Australia. So, again, only about 20% of Australians are achieving this. So there's ways that we can actually improve public health while also reducing auto dependency. So this is kind of the space I tend to focus on. I don't want to talk about it all now because I'm actually very excited to tell you what I saw in the future. But I think that's enough from me at this point. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much, Anthony. Again, I just taking from that huge set of ideas, but just that promise of the use, amongst other things that you talked about, the use of digital technology to improve analysis within planning, but also perhaps to get better communication going, genuine engagement going with citizens and communities who are the recipients, after all, of the planning process ultimately. And now, Lara, can you give us on your side a sense of how your work going forward might assist us to do planning, citizen community engagement a bit better by 2040?
Well, my work is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum of Anthony's work in terms of academia. I tend to focus on qualitative methods rather than looking at quantitative methods, is what we say. So I engage with people and use methods like focus groups and interviews. So when I'm engaging with people in my research, I'm using those kind of very face-to-face methods to get their opinions, their values, their expertise as my data and my evidence to support my research. And while my work is often focused on the detail of the practices in projects, I actually think there's a really important role for future shaping as an output or outcome, I should say, of some of these projects. So shifting from looking at what project managers might traditionally think about as outputs or efficiency around time and cost and scope, quality, those kind of things, which are really important in delivering projects, but also thinking about this broader outcome, sustainability outcomes that might be coming out of this project. So looking at different methods that we might understand what those outcomes are from projects, which involves getting really involved with the community at the beginning of projects, right when we're developing concepts and ideas. We say in our space, very famous academic in my space, Frank Van Clay, talks about the room when the impact of a project begins when the rumours begin about a project. So really thinking about how we engage with communities, even if it's in a broader way, without actually knowing what a project might look like in that first part of planning. But that also tags into a lot of urban planning and the wonderful work that local councils do in describing and exploring hands-on with communities the visions that they want to see with their for the future of their neighbourhoods and their communities as well. So it's not just about the decision-making processes that state government might be making, usually around these large infrastructure projects due to the value and the complexity of them. They're often made at that state government level, but actually engaging in into local councils on the ground with those people that are being directly impacted by these bigger services, but also they want a voice in what their future might look like, what their neighbourhoods might look like. And, you know, as Anthony was starting to talk about just there, you know, the proximity of the things that they need in their daily lives. And while I completely agree with Anthony's methods for doing that and for scoping those types of assessments and conversations around where these impacts might be using, say, tools like GIS, I also think that complementary to that is these kind of forums that engages with the most kind of vulnerable tracts of the community, but also parts of the community that might not be able to access, you know, a big forum, or, you know, that have different needs that are available at different times of day, for example. The different members and the diverse groups that are in community, and I really think that's an important part of what we need to get into in the practices of projects, but also in understanding those wider contexts, you know, when we set the outcomes up for these projects.
Thank you, Lara. Fantastic overview again, and pointing to where, you know, you might be taking your work into the future. Very interesting stories from you both there, folks, past, present and future. It's given us a really good sense, setting up the stall of where you've both come from personally and professionally. Has started to point to the progressive development contributions your work interests could make going forward, which is where we're going to venture further now. So now I want to move into the heart of this episode, the part where we use our imaginations to step outside the boundaries of business as usual and the failing development paths it's taking us down. That is, if we just keep doing what we've always done and don't change course. I've talked in the introductory episode of the series about the stark contrast between the possibilities for achieving failing or flourishing futures, depending on the development decisions we choose to make going forward. So perhaps have a listen to that episode if you haven't done so already. But right now, Anthony and Lara, for our first exercise in Future Vision Imagination, I want to ask you to do something a little out of the box. And of course, listeners out there in podcast land, you can please join if you wish in this exercise. So I want you all to imagine it's the year 2040, that's 15 years or so from now, and we don't have a crystal ball because we're not trying to predict the future, but we do have a powerful future vision tool that often gets overlooked, our imaginations. So the actual task is, picture that thanks to some kind of sci-fi time travel device or time warp, you've just arrived in the year 2040, but this is not just any future year, because this one is flourishing, and you know that because you can see and sense it is climate safer, more socially inclusive, properly nature protected and economically fairer in the share out of financial wealth and resources. It's clearly a future where no one is being left behind. And from across the imaginary 15 years or so between now and 2040, you have gathered evidence of some of the big progressive reforms which made this better, more flourishing 2040 future a reality. From the measurable differences made to reducing and adapting to climate disruption, to the greatly increased protection of natural areas, their species and tree cover, from widely available and genuinely affordable housing to the excellent universal basic services of public transport, health, education and green spaces provided for all citizens. It's clear to you that all of these beneficial changes and many more have been put in place. And while you've been there, in that better, flourishing, thriving 2040 future, you imagine you've written a report. And in that report, you've captured many of the inspiring things you saw in 2040. The progress, the innovation, the increased well-being, the clearly better quality of life being enjoyed by humans and more than humans species. So then imagine you've travelled back to today to share that report with us. So the question specifically is, can you give us a summary of that report now? What did you experience in that better, more flourishing 2040 future? What did you see, hear, feel, and what really stuck with you? So, Anthony, let's start with you on that imaginative exercise, your report from 2040. Give us some of your impressions.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So, What I'm really excited about this future that I envisage really is about higher public engagement, really, and participatory planning, or what we sometimes refer to as also citizen science, where they're providing a lot of the data to really inform planning. So it's really about getting the community to collaborate more, see them as a way to collaborate on making neighbourhood designs better for our health and happiness, and really accommodating socially diverse communities where we can all thrive. Because in some ways, this is one of the big challenges of our time, because we do have, this rapid globalisation as well, another one of those big social processes where our neighbourhood composition has changed considerably over time. And so in lots of ways, we're living like, we did decades ago. We have a lot of private space. You think of a backyard, you're mainly going to interact with people in a backyard that you already know, so it's your friends and family. But if we focus more on, say, public spaces, it gives us more opportunities to engage with our neighbours. So I'm picturing a much more inclusive society, really, because we've designed the neighbourhood to support this. So one of the big challenges really for a lot of planners in this space really is collecting very good data. So you think of a lot of, for instance, social media companies, we all sign those forms that say, yep, sure, you can track me spatially all the time as I move about. I'll respond to these questionnaires. And it's really about their advertising platforms, really. So they're selling us products, but what if the public was more engaged with government in a similar sort of way, so that we were actually co-designing our neighbourhoods? So I picture a future, where we're more willing to share a lot of information that actually supports our planning. It could potentially entail having, say, a smartphone application that tracks your movement, or periodically answering questions about how the built environment feels to you, or how you would like to improve it. And so this is broadly what I picture. So a much more participatory planning sort of future, and a lot more citizen science, where we're providing similar sorts of information to government.
I really like that, real-time feedback. One of just one I just picked up quickly there, real-time feedback using digital devices from the public. You'd think, again, as you just implied, there's huge opportunities for that. But I suppose also listening to, I suppose, a sub-theme there, or at least what I picked up is, is this, does that also bring other issues in terms of privacy and all that sort of stuff? So trying to get that balance right, as always. Yeah.
I guess one of the things we kind of miss out in this really is we're trying to patch the things together from lots of different data sources. So if you think of, say, an intercept survey, we've got people's revealed preferences, so they're saying what they would like to see in their environment. And we also, at the same time, really want to capture, what is their actual behaviour, their revealed preferences. And so this can come from other data sources where you're actually looking at how people move around. But generally they're disconnected. So you might have a local intercept survey, and then you might have, say, the census that runs every 5 years, where we look at how people are, say, commuting to work, and we arrive at very different pictures. So having a more comprehensive data source where these are linked together is what's vitally important. And that's partly informed by my background as well, working at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, where we were linking a lot of these government data sources together to really connect these social surveys with what people are reporting at the individual level. So this is what I really envisage in the future.
That's fantastic. Well, Lara, now time for yourself in terms of this imaginary time travel exercise over to 2040. Perhaps not so much back to the future as back from the future. You've just come back. Give us your report now, Lara, your impressions.
Thanks. So I'm going to grab Anthony's hand and jump into his future, because I really, really, really agree with what he said. But I'm also going to give a picture, I think, of what I actually see, rather than, in terms of processes and policy, which is absolutely what I would think is complementary with Anthony's future too. But I would like to see, what I have seen, I should say, since this is my trip into 2040, is a world slowed down, a different relationship with time. I see streets defined by plants and animals, and how people walking on foot or using bicycles are able to share that space. I don't see any trucks. Oh my goodness, there's no trucks in their city environment. Where did they go? I don't know. Perhaps there is a technological innovation around that. but the pollution is significantly reduced from the lack of noisy, smelly trucks. My vision is that perhaps they've gone onto rail. That's what I would like to see. Or maybe there's some inspiration that's taken from some of the Asian countries or elsewhere where people, might be underground with those trucks on peripheral ring roads, and the cities and neighbourhoods are built around proximity and useful time that they might spend getting from A to B that might have a well-being benefit, like Anthony's, the 30-minute city concept. Where people are cycling, they're using that time for a health benefit. They're getting something back that improves their quality of life, that gives them more time with their family. And there's public transport that you can hop on. And I take a lot of inspiration from the Queensland government here on the 50-cent public transport. And I actually think that that should be adopted in many more places. So because of that, we see more people, and other initiatives probably, we see more people taking public transport and using a bike or walking or whichever mode that suits their physical capabilities and abilities. And for me, that's what I've come back seeing. And I like to think that, Anthony's future is what's also made that happen, what he's seen, that citizen science, that ability to value the people's voice in designing these neighbourhoods and making what they see and what we feel in the neighbourhood match what they value in their daily life and what they need for their families or their home situation, and that contributes holistically to well-being of the whole society. And even on a global scale, when you're thinking about net zero transport or improving practices around using road transport as the dominant mode of transport in society.
Lara, thanks again. Thank you so much for that lovely quality of life centred vision, well-being centred vision for future public services, how it might pan out, how we could make it pan out in that way. And again, for both of you folks, thanks so much for those various impressions from your Imagine 2040 Futures reports. To me, this is what imagining the future is all about, not just conjuring up a complete fantasy world or utopia, but rather using imagination to create a credible vision anchored to expert knowledge and lived experience, a vision created by the ability to look ahead imaginatively and ask, what if we chose a different and better development path into the future? It's a foundational idea of this series that the more people we can help to imagine what flourishing futures could look like, the more likely, the more probable it will become that we can make those futures happen. And you've done a fantastic job, I think, in painting those pictures for us. Okay, let's just do, before we move to our next segment here, let's just do a quick debrief to make sure you're safely back in 2025, because time travel can have quite a fatiguing effect or a set of after effects. So, Anthony and Lara, just to do for the purposes of the exercise, what year is this?
I've just got the newspaper. Yeah, 2025. Yeah, so 17th of June, 2025.
That's great. That's good to know. Okay, so staying in the present moment now, back in 2025. Second, idea about future vision exercises using imagination. Another way we can use imagination to explore the possibilities for more flourishing futures is by looking closely at what's already happening now. Because when we look around us, we can often discover, and you both have actually pointed an outline to some of this, but what might be termed future seeding opportunities, inspiring new initiatives, case studies, proofs of concept, and genuinely bold ideas, which, if taken forward, promoted, and implemented, could lead to far better development outcomes in the future. These seeding opportunities can also be considered as early signs or signals of the future, pointers to a kind of future or futures we'd actually like to see more of over the next 10, 15 or 20 years and beyond. And these future pointing signals aren't just figments of the imagination because they are in existence now, they can be observed. So the question becomes, what if we could amplify these signals, these opportunities, the most promising, better-facing future-facing ideas and initiatives? If they were more strongly supported, strengthened and multiplied, could such signal strengthening help shift us more rapidly onto the pathways towards the sorts of more thriving, life-enhancing and flourishing futures you've both already outlined in your imagination report from 2040? So here's the specific question for you two now on signals. Within your own area of work or expertise, are you seeing any early signals of the future which perhaps could lead us onto better development pathways towards 2040?
Look, I'm seeing a lot more focus on decision-making processes and creating fair and just processes and different methods for engaging with values and extracting those values, I should say, from communities. There's the Real Deal project, which one of my colleagues, Amanda Tattersall, is involved in, and that has been working with regional communities around the net zero transition to really understand what their values and opinions and fears. A lot of concerns about the net zero transition and projects being developed in their backyard. So that's a piece of work that's focused on community organising methods. Within my own space, my own sort of project management field of research that I'm in right now, there's a growing momentum towards understanding future-making methods, which is a little bit like what we're doing today. So my colleague Jennifer White and some of her other colleagues, Luigi Mosca and Alicia Comer, have been writing about this idea of future-making methods for projects and allowing people to imagine a future without the boundaries of what might be set in the current frame of the way that you see the world. It is linked perhaps to co-design, but it's taking it a big step further in that if you're sort of removing the shackles, as you might say, Andy, of the kind of assessment processes or visions and planning that you might get out of, your traditional project management sort of methods, because there is, a lot of work still to be done in trusting those that are delivering big projects, even if they are government. There's a lot of people that are concerned with the fact that these projects are being delivered without consideration of their needs, and I think there is some movement towards early engagement. I should mention the high-speed rail project is doing a fantastic job of this right now. They're in communities on the Central Coast. They're actually on the ground talking to them while they're developing the business case. That's sort of unheard of, really, for a government project. And they're really committed to listening, and I really see that is something that we found hard to do. Engineers find hard to do. They like to build big things, and I don't blame them. It's fun building big things, but listening is a really important skill and an important aspect of planning these big infrastructure projects, which is really kind of the space that I'm in at the moment.
Thank you so much, Lara. Interesting, that last point. Again, just picking up on one or two, riffing off a couple of ideas there. You were talking about engineers and their fondness for designing big things. I mean, ironically enough, in a sense, this podcast series is predicated on the idea of producing more Imagineers who use imagination to develop big things, like big ideas of doing stuff differently. So perhaps, there was a link there. But now, Anthony, over to you. And what about some possible signals of the future you might be seeing within your field of expertise in the planning area?
I would say, really extending on from what Lara's said, there's been a bit of a shift over time where in the past we were very focused always on project delivery, achieving this within our resource constraints, whereas a lot of the data that's available, particularly real-time data, is enabling us to really look at project outcomes in a more meaningful way and saying, okay, well, was this a worthwhile project? What, why did we struggle with this? Did it actually deliver on what we had intended? So I think there's a great shift in that. And I think another thing that and this is particular, I guess, because of our social science roots, really, there's a bigger focus on language and how this influences, the future that we envisage. So at least I tend to work in transport, like I said, and we focus more and more on using these terms like access, accessibility, sustainability, whereas the narrative for so long has really been in transport about speed and distance, really. So you look at how long we've had car ownership, we're constantly widening roads, cities are getting bigger. The daily commute has pretty much stayed the same duration over time, but a lot has changed really around this. So yeah, definitely we're traveling much further and much faster. It gives us more access to different places, but we're really focusing on whether you can access what you need and also how much it's changed. So, early on, you might have typically had one person that was, full-time work in the household. Nowadays, we've got to really find locations that are trade-off between multiple people earning in the household. So that has changed. We're changing careers much more often, so we're changing workplaces. So all these traditional ways that we've thought about cities and about, everybody, say, commuting into the inner city and out is really changing very rapidly. So we need to have a much more dynamic approach to planning. So this is definitely happening. And we're also, I guess, kind of wising up to a lot of these problems that we've had for some time. So you've probably heard this term like the induced demand problem in traffic, where we constantly widen roads, and in so doing it makes driving more appealing. So next we have more cars on the road and we're back to square one with congestion. So we're well aware of these problems. We've had, thinking about the future, we've had all these fantasies about flying cars and, having a George Jetson briefcase where our car folds up, but it's not really going to save us or our planet and actually reduce our commutes and all our time lost searching for parking, really. So there's definitely a shifting focus towards access and really just thinking about, I guess, how driving impacts our lives. So this didn't really come about by accident. We actually had a period in history where the motorist lobbying groups and the auto manufacturers really had to lobby to introduce these things such as jaywalking laws just so they could get enough utility out of their cars. They had all these new machines, but they couldn't actually drive them fast for all the people, so they had to get us out of the way. Now we're dealing with the consequences where we've got stretched urban forms and it's actually very inconvenient to walk and cycle through cities. And a lot of our public transport has lost its utility because things such as buses have to wade through this same traffic. So much like Lara said, I really look forward to a future where it's much more orientated around, say, trains rather than cars, because we're just not solving this problem. And also, let's face it, Australians are really struggling with the affordability crisis, really, both in terms of housing and also their weekly budgets. And cars are very expensive. So the Australian Automobile Association has this dashboard where you can look at how much Australians are spending on average for cars. And in the first quarter of 2025, it was $447 per week. So that is taking into account the cost of purchasing, it's taking into account depreciation, what you're paying on your loan, insurance, maintenance, all these expenses, fueling. It's very expensive and represents about 15.8% of the median household income. So that's a big chunk of change for families that are struggling. And it's actually quite unusual when we look at this, particularly across the more developed countries, because this is where we typically say that if you're sacrificing more than 10% of your household income for transport, you're living in transport poverty, because it's associated with making a lot of critical lifestyle sacrifices. So in terms of diet, eating more fast food to make up for lost time, you're choosing employment that's closer to home. And it's also associated with lots of things such as social withdrawal. So there's lots of consequences of sacrificing a lot of your income on cars. So this is a way that we can relieve it. And I guess the other thing that I'm particularly excited about, I guess, in southeast Queensland, really tied to this, is transit-orientated development. So this is really where we're looking at concentrating populations towards train stations so that they can walk and access a lot of their daily needs in their locality, but they can jump on a train without waiting through traffic to reach these more distant locations, whether it's another workplace. So this is, I guess what really gets me excited about planning and what we're seeing sort of unfold in front of us. We're paying less attention to, all the car advertisements, going our own way, getting out of all congestion while we're sitting there on public transport and thinking more about how things could be better.
Perhaps imagining better futures, having plenty of time to put that Imagineer hat on. One thing I take from that great little segment there, Anthony, the story of progress in people's heads, and who writes the stories. I mean, we're talking specifically there about transport, public transport, but I think it goes across the board. That interesting sort of vignette there, I remember reading something myself, that the electric cars, when you look at the current debate and the sort of propaganda that's going on around electric vehicles, all that sort of stuff, they were around in the early 20th century, and as you say, there was active resistance by vested interests in terms of the early car manufacturers to resist the trend towards electric vehicle production because it just didn't suit their purpose. So very, very interesting indeed. And thank you so much, both of you, for those great ideas and reflections on the signals of the future. And those innovative opportunities which already exist, which we perhaps could strengthen and push forward to get us onto better development paths more rapidly into 2040 and beyond. There's some resource links on the use of signals of the future in the introductory episode show notes, and you can find the links for that on the Hope Incorporated Australia website, so have a look at those if you haven't done already. But now, as we move toward the final part of this great conversation today, I want to shift the time gears one last time and bring us back to that energising vision of a preferable, flourishing 2040 future that you started to outline so ably before. And just to make the point, we want to do this because we want our listeners out there to get practice in becoming Imagineers, imaginative and visionary thinkers who over time strengthen and direct the power of their personal and collective imaginations to develop their own visions of their own preferable futures to help build citizen-led imaginative power which can help break through the frequent knee-jerk negativity and mental roadblocks created by business-as-usual development mindsets. So, in light of that ringing endorsement of imaginative thinking to achieve better futures, let's now come to our last imaginative future vision exercise. And the idea here is to come up with 3 powerful actions you would take to help bring about a flourishing future, but without being hampered by all the nagging can't do or sky will fall in small-minded negativity that business-as-usual thinking tends to specialise in. So, imagine that you wake up tomorrow and you just know that, along with many other like-minded people, Imagineers like yourself perhaps, you have your collaborative hands on the levers of great power, power which enables you, along with others, to bring about wise and well-considered major changes and reforms which can benefit our communities, but which cannot be blocked by business-as-usual pushback. So in that imaginary situation, describe up to 3 bold, assertive actions you would take, starting immediately if you want, that would make it more likely we would be achieving those better, more flourishing development pathways by 2040. Or you could use the imaginative method of backcasting to put your action choices at different points along the timeline between now and 2040, just to say to listeners that you can find some information about the use of future vision backcasting on the Hope Incorporated Australia website. And again, just follow the links in the show notes. So Lara, let's come to you in terms of your 3 assertive, bold actions. Away you go.
Thank you. I might be a little bit biased by my time living in the Netherlands, but I really, really think that we need to reclaim the streets. I know that there is a movement towards that. There's some fantastic policy work around that. So, Carlos Morenos's work into the 15-minute city, which Anthony has sort of mentioned a little bit. There's Marco to Brommelstraat, the cycling professor who is in the Netherlands, talking about how they've reclaimed the streets within the city centres of their big major kind of populated areas across the country, but Amsterdam in particular, cars are almost out of the city centre. There's a fantastic case of Groningen in the north, where literally overnight they took the cars out of the town centre and now they have some 70 to 80% of trips by bicycle. Much smaller city, say, than Sydney. But, it's pretty similar to Toowoomba, and how incredible would that be? So that's one of the big things that I would say taking back the roads, that space for public use, not just about cars, particularly in city centres. My second one is I think there should be free education. And, tradies, for example, we need more tradies, but yet they're forced to work in this apprenticeship arrangements, working for nothing. Perhaps it's a better kind of environment for them to be trained in a kind of collaborative, hands-on space. TAFE is subsidised already, but that would be incredible. But I think an important part of that education is a basic understanding, not just for tradies, but in tertiary education, other forms of education around people and planet interactions. I think we have a pretty good handle as a population of Australia or even the world on safety issues. We don't want more fatalities on the road. We don't want more fatalities in the workplace. But do people really understand people-planet interactions? Like, what does it mean to put your recycling in the recycle bin versus in the normal bin? Like, what does it actually have? What's the outcome? And I think an important piece in that is the education and giving people the opportunity to get the best education that they possibly can would be certainly encouraged by free education or close to free education. And my final big idea is a national transport network. And I mentioned before that I was very excited by the success of the 50-cent public transport in Queensland. But what if the whole country adopted that? What if there was a common public transport system across the country, including high-speed rail, which I'm also a big advocate for, which you might have gathered, removing the monopoly of the big corporate airlines and giving people some other options. Okay, perhaps you wouldn't have that at 50% because at 50 cents because there's a lot more maintenance and running costs. But you could also integrate freight into a system like that to remove freight, the need for road freight, I should say, and put it on a faster network, which would also recoup some of the costs. So, yeah, that would be really great if I could see those three things happening. I think that would definitely set us on the path to a brighter future.
Lara, great energizing ideas. Again, all doable. All of the stuff you've mentioned is doable. It's not a question of it's rocket science or, a kite flying exercise. It's, again, vested interest, pushback, and all the arguments about why you can't do something that tends to prevail. Amsterdam, again, having been there a couple of times, I just remember, it's just one of those gold standard examples, isn't it? You just see the bike racks, bicycles everywhere, dedicated bicycle lanes, and they've had that for 10, 15, 20 odd years or even longer than that. And they're also running donut economics as a planning framework for the city, or they were until quite recently. So just one of those standout examples. So Anthony, what about for your ideas for the three bold assertive actions that you would take that would make a genuinely significant difference to development by 2040?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I guess at this point in my life, like I said, I've had lots of different areas I've worked in over time, both in industry and in universities, and I'm really focused on education at the moment. So I guess I can really extend some of what Lara described there, where I would see change, and also thinking particularly about the critical challenges for education at the moment. So, we're grappling with large language models and how this is going to change the workforce, how it's going to potentially reduce a lot of those entry-level positions. So I'm very cognizant of how we prepare our students for a very uncertain future. And what I don't like talking to students is a lot of them are kind of holding back and, much like I felt a bit paralysed by choice about what do you do when you don't know what the future is going to look like. So I would see quite a big transformation in terms of how we design degrees going forward. So I would say that broadly we need almost like two majors, let students have a bit more freedom in terms of what they choose and bring back together. So broadly I think they need really a major that focuses on what drives them, something that excites them that they would do even if they weren't being paid, because it really promotes that curiosity, that love of lifelong learning that is really necessary today. And I think it's going to set them on the right path. For me, that was cities and social processes, and it's what encourages me to keep on this path and keep studying it. But it could be lots of areas. So, it could be economics, it could be music, all these things that enrich society. And then the other one really is a discipline that really clarifies their thinking. So if you think of a lot of disciplines like mathematics, computer science, statistics really was it for me, and also a lot of programming. I'm not saying everyone needs to become a programmer, but I think these disciplines are really good for sharpening your thinking, because if you can explain something to a computer in code, you understand it. So it's really about clarifying your thought and reducing this ambiguity in a lot of what we discuss. So a lot of planning is ambiguity. At the end of the day, we need experts that can interpret all these different information sources, but we actually need to go much further. We need to explain our thinking processes. We need to make sure that it's transparent, and this is where these sorts of disciplines are very effective at sharpening our mind and our communication. So I'd like to see more graduates kind of juggling two majors, something that makes them very passionate and something that really reduces the ambiguity in their thinking. So that's a big one for me. Also, more specifically, I guess, in terms of planning, I see the profession growing much more and getting a lot more recognition, really. So I'd like to see it growing in terms of size and specialisations, because right now we do have a decline in enrolments. We've got programs closing around the country, and we've also introduced urban planning onto the skilled professions list for immigration to try and plug this gap. So we do need planners, but we're not really giving them enough attention, I would say, for something that's very critical for how we design our futures. So I guess part of this could come through building up geography back in schools once more and emphasising its particular role, because it's really a discipline that's all about distance, really, and about the social, economic and environmental costs of covering distance, basically, and also, the way that borders and zoning have such a big impact on our lives and opportunities. So I think we need to build this back up to really get planning growing, and I'd also like to see some more stronger specialisations really within planning. So I'm involved with several committees with the Planning Institute of Australia, where we're really working to make these distinctions between what's really the core competencies of a planner and what are specialisations that can actually extend our profession more and make it really maximise its impact. So I tend to focus on plan tech, but there's also, for instance, spatial planning that's very GIS focused and thinking about how we lay out our cities. So I'd like to see that really as my second point, is really just building up the planning discipline once more and really supporting it so that we can develop these deep specialisations that are very impactful to society. And I guess the last thing, and this has really what got me started on this path, because like I said, I had a bit of an unusual background. I did archaeology, which is really what gave me my GIS expertise, and I also did sociology, and it's really, this is where I learned a lot of quantitative methods and took this much further. But if I'm going to be honest, a lot of the techniques I learned was actually from going along to these events like hackathons, where you've got a lot of people from different disciplines all coming together. They're quite often run by government or NGOs, really, and people collaborate and try and address a particular problem, and quite often they're planning in theme. So it could be related to transport. It was EnviroHack that got me caught really on this, and so I'd like to see a lot more of these sorts of initiatives. Also, Research Bazaar is one that I quite often get involved with. So these sorts of events where people can get together and really geek out about the sorts of skills and how to apply them to these big challenges of our time. So they're definitely already there. They're just not, I guess, widely known enough. So we've got to do a lot more to promote these types of events and really encourage people to step outside of their discipline. I don't see a lot of planners there, but they're planning. It's other people, other disciplines working on planning problems. So they should be part of this conversation and engaging in these activities. So these are three big areas that I would like to see. Really a big transformation in terms of how we structure degrees, really to adapt to this uncertain future, building up the planning profession, and also promoting a lot of these sorts of public events like hackathons where people share skills.
Wow, Anthony, thank you very much. What I'm taking from that, let's have more expansive, imaginary, interdisciplinary collaboration. Couldn't agree more. Thanks to you both, folks. Great stuff there. It's always inspiring, as I've discovered with each episode I've done here. It's always inspiring to hear imagination used in this way. imagination which helps point us toward the possible assertive visionary actions which could help us achieve better, more flourishing, could do and can do futures by 2040 and beyond. And now for the absolute last question for you two, I promise, in this great, wonderful, enjoyable episode. Do you have any parting words of wisdom for our audience? Perhaps a pithy comment which helps summarise your core ideas in the episode, or perhaps a suggestion for how listeners could get more deeply involved with the ideas and initiatives we have been discussing today. Whatever you want to say in closing would be excellent. So Anthony, let's start with you on that point.
Thanks, Andy, and thank you for inviting me onto this show. So I guess, given the content I've discussed, my recommendations really is that planning really is there to represent the public. They're people that, pay our salaries, and so definitely get involved with planning where you can. We have, public consultation is part of planning, so there's capacity to do that. There's definitely a lot of advocacy groups you can get involved with. So some that I'm involved with are Better Streets, Queensland Walks, Bicycle Queensland, that are working very hard to change the, active transport infrastructure really in cities. So there's ways to get involved with this. And also, if you're already familiar with the planning program, please tell younger people about our profession. It's the only way people are going to find out about it once more is really if we talk about and recognise the profession. We tend to focus very much on planning when there's a crisis such as that, our current housing affordability crisis. We're focused very much on essentially, how fast people are processing development applications, but we have a shrinking profession and a huge workload for these planners, so we do need to build the profession back up and really recognise that there's two sides to it. So we have statutory planning, which is really when you're processing all those development applications. We've also got a lot of strategic planners as well that really think about very, thoughtfully about how we lay out our cities. It's making sure that the infrastructure connects at the right date with where development is occurring. So we need to really let people know about the profession and the ways that they can contribute, because we tend to focus very much on a lot of other disciplines like, say, environmental management, but you can have a tremendous environmental impact by starting a career in planning. So that's it for me, Andy, and thanks again for inviting me on.
Brilliant stuff, Anthony. And Lara, now your closing comments.
Fantastic. Yeah, I would just like to reiterate, take back your decision-making power. We are so lucky in Australia that we do have these processes that we've been talking about, where you can have a voice, you can have a say, you can provide input into what your local park is going to look like. You have that interface with the local council right at your fingertips wherever you live. And they do want to hear from you. There are planners sitting at their computers potentially, or if they're lucky, they might let them out of the office. And they are just people like you who really, really want to see their cities, their towns, their neighbourhoods reflect the values that individuals and communities and groups want to see. And do keep them accountable and follow up if you don't get a response. Don't be afraid to speak up and say something if you notice something. So even if they haven't given you the opportunity to comment on something, if you think that you might want to see some improvement in your local park or wherever it might be, do speak up. Take back your decision-making power in these processes and don't be afraid to take control of your future.
Well, folks, lovely, uplifting and practical comments to round out this excellent conversation from both of yourselves. Thank you so much for that. We've been talking here about the possibilities for moving on to better development pathways toward more flourishing futures by 2040 and beyond. And I can't thank you enough for the amount of time you've given to our conversation today. So thank you so much, folks.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you for running such a terrific show. Appreciate being invited on and engaging in this discussion.
Thanks, Andy. I've had a wonderful time. It's so great to be here alongside Anthony as well. Thank you too for inspiring me and planners and people everywhere.
Thanks again. At the end of each episode, I wonder what you, our listeners, our community of increasingly future literate, imaginative future thinkers, will take away from this episode and our energising journey into visualising possible pathways to better futures by 2040. We would like you to be part of this podcasting experiment in Future Vision Imagination and to help us try to answer a question. Could a podcast series like this help with sparking the shift, the transition we so urgently need toward better, climate safer, properly nature protected, socially and economically fairer future development pathways? Only time will tell if we can answer this question, tied to the podcast's ambitious deeper purpose. In the meantime, we hope you will continue the conversations sparked by this episode in your homes, workplaces, communities, organisations, and anywhere ideas are shared. Perhaps you may be inspired to answer your own future vision questions, such as what could a more desirable, flourishing future in 2040 look like for me and for those around me? Or how might the imaginative tools used in each episode, 2040 time travel, signals of the future, and taking 3 powerful actions, help me reflect, frame, and communicate my hopes for a better tomorrow? If you're enjoying the series, please consider sharing it. And word of mouth remains one of the most powerful ways to grow a podcast audience, and perhaps an online community committed to cultivating flourishing futures. We'd also love to hear from you. What ideas or questions stood out? What resonated or challenged you? You can send us your reflections, comments or questions by email, social media, text or voice message. You'll find contact details via the Hope Incorporated Australia's website and in the episode show notes. We also welcome your suggestions for possible future guests, topics or ways we might improve the format of the series. We see this podcast as a collaborative project, and your input could help shape what comes next. So until the next episode, keep your imaginations active and alive, keep wearing your 2040 Flourishing Futures hats, and please keep sharing ideas about how, individually and together in visionary community, we can use the power of imagination to shift our development pathways toward a truly flourishing 2040 and beyond. My name is Andrew Nicholson, and thanks so much for listening. Hope Incorporated Australia, providing podcasts, research and community educational outreach to help achieve our vision of a society which is sustainable and just, ecologically, socially and economically. For more details on our work, please visit our website at www.hopeaustralia.org.au.